Well, here we have an absolutely beautiful 1977 Lincoln Mark V, the first year of the Mark V, and this vehicle is finished in a beautiful color called dark cordovan. I think it's the best color for these Mark Vs, certainly for Mark Vs without a vinyl roof. This is one of those very, very rare Mark Vs that doesn't have the vinyl roof. And while it was a $187 option, you pretty much had to explicitly specify that you didn't want it on the vehicle in order for it to come without it. 1977, as I mentioned, was the first year for the Mark V. It ran from 1977 to 1979, and it was the best-selling generation of the Mark series, with about 230,000 sold in those three model years. This has the mini vents, as you can see here as well. That little portion of the glass goes down first when you push the power window switch, and then the bigger portion of the glass goes down after that. That was an option on these, and it's pretty cool, especially if you're a smoker. And while this car does have mini vents, it doesn't have the illuminated entry system you can see by the keyhole there. Let's walk around the other side of the vehicle. You can take a look and see the car from the rear three-quarter view without this vinyl roof, and I think it just looks absolutely spectacular, especially that line that forms the top of the quarter panel, how it beautifully fades out as it goes into that C-pillar there with the opera window. Something that you don't get to see on the Mark Vs without the vinyl roof. This car does have the wrong license plate. It has a 1976 Michigan license plate on it. This is a 1977 vehicle, though. They didn't make Mark Vs in 1976. They were still making the Mark IV. And this Mark V, to that point, is based on the Mark IV chassis that was introduced in the 1972 model year. Up until the Mark V, the Mark series and the Thunderbird were sharing platforms, and that really began with the 1969 model year and the Mark III. However, in order to reduce competition amongst the divisions and, frankly, move the Thunderbird down market to drive more volume because Ford's Elite was not selling very well, the Mark V stayed on the previous generation's Mark IV chassis while the Thunderbird changed chassis and became a counterpart to the Mercury Cougar. It's a good thing, too, because those Ford Elites, at least in my opinion, were pretty gosh darn ugly. Take a look at that bumper offset from the grill, too, that was dictated by the 5-mile-an-hour bumper standard. I think this has one of the largest bumper offsets from the body of any vehicle that I can recall, and I love how there's a cutout around the grill there that you can basically see the ground through and stick your hand through if needed. Regardless, still a handsome overall design, and has that Rolls-Royce grille that began with the Mark III when Lee Iacocca told designers to put a Rolls-Royce grille on the Thunderbird, and you can certainly see the inspiration that carried over here. And the other inspiration that carried over was that bump in the trunk, that kind of faux spare tire, if you will. In 1977, there were two engines that were available in the Mark V. There was a 400 cubic inch 6.6-liter V8 that made close to 180 horsepower, and there was an optional 460 cubic inch V8 which made 208 horsepower. Really not that much different between them, although both had about 330 to 360 foot-pounds of torque, so they were pretty torquey, although the car was certainly not a speed rocket. One thing that did help acceleration, though, was that Ford engineers cut a considerable amount of curb weight from the Mark IV in designing this Mark V. The curb weight went down from about 5,000 pounds, yes, 5,000 pounds, to about 4,600 pounds. And this vehicle is still very, very long at over 230 inches in overall length and 120-inch wheelbase. Relatively short wheelbase, but super long overhangs on these Mark Vs. That was kind of the Ford style of the time, to have equal length overhangs front and rear, something that you would certainly never see today on vehicles where designers are trying to push the wheels out to the corners to give the vehicles a more planted look. I did previously mention that this Mark V has the mini vent windows, but it does not have the illuminated entry system. And this was the first vehicle on which Ford introduced that illuminated entry system, which was a timed about 30-second circuit. If you pulled the door handle, it would illuminate the lock cylinder and also the interior lights. Illuminated entry had been offered on other competitive makes of the time, including some Cadillacs, but this was where it made its debut for Ford and really set the stage for what would later be a super popular Ford feature, that illuminated keyless entry system keypad that was mounted on the driver's door that would first be shown on the Mark VI. It was not available on the Mark Vs. And here you have the famous Continental spare trunk hump, if you will, that graced all of these Mark IIIs, 4s, 5s, 6s, and even the Mark 7s and 8s. Became a styling feature that was just purely decorative. There is no spare tire there. I think it looks kind of cool, if not kitschy. And the Mark V did have this return to Mark III style blade-like taillights that were vertically oriented. If you recall, the Mark IV had horizontal taillights, but the Mark V returned to its Mark III roots with this particular taillight theme, although it does have some decorative horizontal elements to it, whereas the Mark IIIs were pretty plain overall. As the Mark V aged in 1978, a very special edition would be introduced called the Diamond Jubilee Edition that was launched to help commemorate Ford's 75th anniversary at the time. It was also available on the Thunderbird, but this Diamond Jubilee Edition was not offered in 1977. Buyers had to just make do with a few little extra designer series, including the Designer Series Edition. There was also a Majestic Velour luxury group that was available in 1977 if you wanted to jazz up your interior a little bit. The 1978 Diamond Jubilee editions also had Ford's first use, and it was a relatively brief use, only 1978, 1979 model years, electromechanical seatbelt warning chimes. They were only available on the Diamond Jubilee edition. The regular Mark Vs would just have to make do with a regular annoying seatbelt warning buzzer. So unfortunate for those buyers. 1979 would represent the last year of the Mark V, and unfortunately the big 460 V8 would be discontinued, and there was only the 400 cubic inch V8 available. The 400 wasn't a bad engine, but it did have some lower end issues, and in these years there were some casting porosity issues as well. So make sure that if you're looking for one of these Mark Vs that the engine runs well and there's no coolant in the oil. They actually sent out notifications to customers about casting porosity, and I believe that Ford even extended the warranty period on the engine in the event that customers experienced issues. It was something that was somewhat prevalent. For 1979, the electromechanical seatbelt warning chimes were carried over, and they were now not only standard on the Collector Series, but also were standard on the Designer Series as well. One other unique piece of trivia about these Mark Vs is that they're all equipped with four-wheel disc brakes, so they do actually stop pretty well. And while one may think that American cars during this time period had pretty poor brakes, the fact of the matter is that they actually were halfway decent. Cadillac also had four-wheel disc brakes, as did Imperial during this time period. Hope you enjoyed this brief walk around of this beautiful 1977 dark Cordovan Lincoln Mark V. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.